I worry about the printing, about hyperinflation, about all the stuff that I think might happen. I hope doesn't happen because it could lead to a dark dystopian place in some ways. But if we build Bitcoin infrastructure and onboard people quickly enough, then maybe it can be somewhat of a smooth upgrade for society.
Welcome to the Tucson Bitcoin podcast. Today my guests are Kelly Lannan and Stephen Cole. So Kelly is a real estate developer and the author of a Substack called Bitcoin Urbanism, which is a great tool, if you want to learn about what could the future hold for real estate under a Bitcoin standard. It's really interesting to dive into and look at how does city planning change and how does building materials get in architecture get better. We get away from these stupid cookie cutter houses and just cheaply made buildings. Stephen is an investor in the space. He is very instrumental in getting a lot of Bitcoin companies off the ground and getting started. And he also started the Arizona Bitcoin Network, which is a meetup based out of Phoenix. And it is awesome. It is so much fun to go. We're going to be having one on May 20th up in Phoenix. And I'm really excited. Check it out. If you want to get away from all the FUD and all the silliness that, you see on Twitter, just going around the mainstream about Bitcoin boiling the oceans, and it's just like the same stupid FUD over and over again. Bitcoin meetups are great. You can stop being demoralized and hang out with people that are actually solution oriented. And if you have friends or family that don't really get it, bring them. And they might have a good conversation with some other people and learn a bit. And even if you don't know anything and you want to learn, Bitcoin meetups are great. We just had a great one on Saturday in Tucson, and it was just so awesome to see that there are Bitcoiners here. People that are really interested in building a better, brighter future and not falling into a dystopian nightmare. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this conversation and have a good one. Well, good to have you on, guys. It's fun.
Good to be here.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for setting this up.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, like you were saying, Kelly, a little bit of a desert pleb sesh we got going today.
That's right.
AZ Bitcoiners.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy. It feels like the Bitcoiners are prophets right now. Like everything that we've been talking about, inflation, all the chaos and disorder. Kelly, you were talking about crumbling infrastructure, and we're seeing that left and right. Seems like we're prophets, but I think just what ultimately is happening is everybody was calling out what was happening, and then it's gotten to a point where we can't ignore it. But yeah, what do you guys think about that?
It's pretty it's pretty interesting that we hammer on the fact that the infrastructure is old, and the Civil Engineering Society says that we get a D for just about everything. And then once you're in a situation where you're put under stress, that everything basically falls apart. So if you're gonna learn, I guess, what the status really is, then just turn the heat up a little bit, have a couple things go wrong, and then see what happens. And I think the whole Eastern Seaboard is seeing what's happening, especially when they've got an entire pipeline company that's running on software that's quite old, from what I understand, at least by software standards. If anything's 5 years old in software standards, it might as well be 100 years old.
Pretty much. Yeah, it seems like the pipeline situation over there, particularly on the East Coast, is getting pretty spicy. I think it's similar to, it takes a while for these kinds of things to make it to mainstream media sometimes, right? Where whether it was the pandemic or whether it's just significant macro econ things, I feel like often when something's an important big deal and they don't want people to know about it, Twitter will just kind of be buzzing. There will be like this little energetic undertone on Twitter to things. And I feel like that's the phase right now of the gasoline shortage and the cell phone footage of crazy lines in certain cities to pump gas and some stations just being out. And it doesn't seem, from what I've heard from friends, that CNN's really talking about it. The mainstream media is really talking about it, which would make sense because you don't want to incite a panic. But but yeah, I just wonder if the effects of that are going to continue to ripple through a little bit more of the country and then eventually be harder to ignore. I hope not. I hope it just, turns out wonderfully, because people not being able to get gasoline is very real pain. But be prepared
Yeah,
just in
but I
case.
think the other thing to consider too, it's not just gasoline; it's natural gas, it's jet fuel.
Yep.
I was talking to somebody earlier. I just came back from the Caribbean this last Friday, and if the system had gone down a day earlier, I'd still be stuck there. I read an article, I think it was this morning, saying that American has had to cease all long haul flights along the eastern seaboard because they don't have jet fuel.
Yeah, I'm supposed to fly to New York Thursday, and I'm keeping a close eye on this.
I'm just worried about driving up to Phoenix.
Yeah, never
Like,
mind getting on a plane, right?
Yeah. Well,
I
I
mean,
think
I
we depend on a separate system. I remember in high school, there was a leak in the fuel pipe from basically there's a pipe that runs from Texas all the way to California to transport fuel. And there was a leak somewhere in southern Arizona. I think it was actually out by Wilcox, Alex. And so they had to dig it up and they had to shut down essentially the entire gas supply coming out of Texas to Arizona for like 5 days in order to do the environmental cleanup and fix it and all these other things. But, for a matter of 5 days, Phoenix basically had zero gasoline. So it was the same thing that you see on Twitter with all of the different places in the South, or I guess along the Eastern Seaboard, generally, taking videos of all the cars lined up. It was the same thing here. That if you weren't lucky enough to have gas before it all happened, there was a very slim chance that you got gas while it was, quote unquote, short. So
I saw the best little tongue-in-cheek tweet about this this whole situation earlier today. I think it was from Dave Bradley, and he was quote tweeting someone who was talking about the gas shortage, and he's like, "Which failing system are we talking about here? Ethereum or the nation state?"
that's true.
Both seem to have significant problems with gas.
Well, they both operate in a very similar way where it's just kind of like patch as you go. And it's not about creating a sustainable, solid infrastructure on either project. And it's just a complete mess. And I just feel bad for people, because the price will go up probably and then it'll break and then it'll go down. And we just don't have that with Bitcoin. Like, it's an entirely different philosophy and it's like bulletproof. And yeah, I mean, it's I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
Well, yeah,
yeah, it's hard to
I
put
agree.
even to put into words, right?
Yeah, the infrastructure for something like Bitcoin is very much uh, slow and steady, and then you try to break it as much as possible before you actually ever use it. In a good way, it's kind of like what SpaceX is doing with the Starship models. They built, I think it was 18 or 19 of them before they finally were able to land it safely, and then it didn't blow up as well. So I think it's a very similar process where if anybody's introducing anything, it's a very long cycle to bring in new, code into the code base. And then people are always tinkering with the hardware to try and make it more energy efficient and, crank out as many hashes as possible. So it's like there's a very good system of checks and balances in place, and it's not the move fast and break things ethos. It's the don't break anything on the main net. Go play with it somewhere else, and then come back when you're ready.
I agree with that completely. I think it's really common, unfortunately, especially in these other cryptocurrency projects, to see this sort of, shrug it off like, oh, okay, the smart contract platform got hacked, a bunch of money got stolen, and everybody has this attitude of like, shrug, it'll be okay.
It's only $100
And
million, Steven. Come on.
right. And it took time to appreciate, because the narrative, right, in a lot of the mainstream is like Bitcoin is old and crufty and slow, and there's all this hot, flashy new stuff happening elsewhere. But over time, you just really start to understand and appreciate why Bitcoin takes that sort of tortoise approach, if it's like the tortoise and the hare, right? Of very gradual improvements, conservative development style, even having an adversarial mindset when it comes to thinking about how the system can be attacked and how some change could be manipulated to have undesirable effects. And that's really the only project that I see that is consistently taking that bulletproof, safe approach to it. And that's what I want for my money, right? If you're storing
Right.
your value somewhere, the hard work and all that you've created in the world, that's exactly the kind of culture I want around protecting it.
Yeah, you kind of sound like a boomer when you say that. Like, I like gold because I can physically hold it, and that's.
I like my
Right.
Bitcoin because my ASICs don't change.
I literally, like, I tweeted something the other day about how I don't hold any other cryptocurrencies or anything else, for like just Bitcoin. And a bunch of the replies were like, "Oh, you're such a Bitcoin boomer." Like, it's like, man, that's where we're at with all this. Fine.
Well,
I'll embrace
I'm,
it.
I mean, I think that's so legitimate. And what people need to understand is like Bitcoin is not volatile. It's the fiat money that's volatile. Like we have a sound monetary policy that isn't going to be changed. And we know what's going to happen 30 days or 30 years from now. And you don't know what's going to happen with fiat, 30 days, let alone 30 seconds from now. Something like insane or crazy is going to be manipulated. And like, I think people are waking up to this. Like the entire fiat system is like Enron, pretty much. Like it is just like a complete disaster, ready to just blow up. And that's why Bitcoin is so important. One of the things you also tweeted, Steven, which is kind of interesting, you said that you've never seen a use case for like a private blockchain within a company. Um, there's a lot of discussion about stuff like that still happening of different companies wanting to use that. Why don't you think there's ever like a real legitimate reason to use a private blockchain like that?
Yeah, I was stoked on the idea initially, like many years ago when I was, obviously newer to the space and kind of getting my bearings and all this. I was pretty excited about that. So my background is web technology, like internet tech and infrastructure. And I thought, okay, this is some new data structure, right? It's a different place between like databases and networks. So networks are really good at distribution, databases are really good at like state and being authoritative there, and this blockchain thing is kind of an interesting in between with different trade-offs. And so I thought, oh, maybe there are these clever use cases for that internally within an organization. But the more and more that I really looked into the details there, I just struggled to actually find a place where an old school, boring MySQL relational database wouldn't do a better job and wouldn't be a simpler, just better tool for the task. I think a lot of that comes down to the trust minimization that is really the core advantage you get with a blockchain, and especially like a public blockchain like Bitcoin's. When you introduce trust into it, it's much harder. Like if you're one corporation, IBM is trying to do a lot with like enterprise blockchain, for example. If everything within the blockchain can kind of be manipulated by IBM Incorporated, then you don't need a lot of the slow clunkiness and the plumbing that you kind of have to incur as a cost to run a blockchain. It can just be simpler and cheaper and more performant to do that same thing with a good old-fashioned database. I think a lot of the attempts at this stuff are really just to kind of ride the hype. It's to be viewed as forward thinking. So, look at us, we're IBM, we're using blockchain. But once you really drill into the substance of it and the value proposition, I think a great litmus test is, can you describe the value proposition of your project, your startup, your company's solution, whatever it is, without using the word blockchain? And if so, then maybe it's valid. Like maybe the blockchain is just kind of this implementation detail. It's like it just happens to be the right tool for the job. But if you can't get people to be excited about what you're doing without using the word blockchain in like the pitch, then to me that's a red flag. That seems like you're just trying to kind of ride the hype, and it might be simpler to do things the other way. So yeah, to this day, I've still never seen what I consider a compelling use case, anything that I would invest in or think is solid for a private enterprise blockchain like Hyperledger or anything like that. I think it's all noise.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Decentralized databases that don't work as
Yeah.
efficiently.
And often it's the edge cases where you get eaten alive. Like even if you're trying to do those things where you're like tying physical objects in the real world to a blockchain, for example, like, oh, we're going to track banana logistics, like shipping around the world, like on the blockchain, or we're going to tokenize, real estate and all of that, then I think those are like, they're well-intentioned projects in many cases, but you just get eaten alive by these edge cases where even if 75% of the workflows might be valid in some way, there's all this like, okay, if you create some cryptographic, token of real estate and then somebody acquires it and they lose their private keys, what happens? Like, do they really not own that real estate anymore? If somebody across the world hacks their wallet, does that person own that real estate now? Can the other person no longer like physically walk inside of it or exert influence over it? Like what does that really mean? So and then the answer you get is usually, oh, well, there's this exception process where you appeal to this like federation or this central authority, and then they correct that, that mistake. And so at that point, it's really just coming back to this centralized list, and it gets to the place where it's cheaper to run a database again.
Man, I remember telling people how cool it would be to put real estate on a blockchain in 2018 and how dumb that is.
I was part of that organization that tried, or International Blockchain Real Estate Association. That was run by Ragnar Leaf Racer. So I remember that they did a test. They did a test transaction using a color token in 2018, I think in Cook County, that they were trying to transfer title, and they used it was a very basic deed. Essentially, they wanted to see if they could record it if they wanted to. So I think they were able to do it, if I remember correctly. But, kind of going from there, it was basically competing with land registries, which are essentially centralized databases. So like if you're in a country, I think Israel and Norway were cases that we heard people come and speak about, where they have a singular land registry, whereas in the US we use a county recording system. So like if you are in Maricopa County or Pima, you would go to your local recording deal or the website or whoever, then that's where you would record transfer of title. Whereas Ibrea was trying to figure out how to do it using the Bitcoin blockchain. So at least it wasn't kind of like a shitcoin, but it was, you run into the jurisdictional problem where it's like, okay, well, if you record it here, who cares? Or, like you said, if you lose your keys to the Bitcoin being recorded as part of the color coin on the blockchain, how are you going to transfer that color coin, as far as transferring title goes? Because you still have to have a UTXO in order to move it. So that's, it's yet to be solved. It's one of those things on the meat space list problems where it's like, okay, yeah, we'll get to that one later. We've got a different problem now. We'll fix the money, then we'll fix everything else.
Totally.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think that's like part of the reason why we've seen that movement move more digital, like into NFTs and stuff like that. Because I think there's a little bit less room to. So there was an interesting example of this that was presented to me. So like we all know, I think that the whole NFT thing, the ownership over JPEGs is kind of stupid. But on like in a video game, for instance, so I guess Samson Mao is explaining or is experimenting with like digital ownership over vehicles in his spaceship video game. I think that's kind of interesting. It's like one of those ideas that is presented in the Sovereign Individual is like the internet really changes things. It's a jurisdiction, or it is a borderless Wild West place, and I think that there may be a future, and it'd probably be built on Bitcoin, not Ethereum. But it's probably just noise and silliness to focus on right now. But yeah,
That's kind of where I'm at. Is I think the notion of NFTs is actually promising. I feel like there could be some substance there in the very, very long term. But right now, I just think it's wildly overhyped and it's mostly noise. So I'm the main reason why I'm not taking them too seriously right now is because the vast majority are built on Ethereum, and I'm skeptical that Ethereum is going to be around and just be a reliable platform long term. So whatever you put on it, I just don't know if Ethereum will be able to preserve that value, or if it's just going to get sort of centralized to the point that it fades into obscurity someday. So where I've kind of arrived is like, once NFTs become more popular on Bitcoin or like Bitcoin based platforms such as Liquid or RGB, then I'm absolutely going to start paying attention. I don't think I would personally buy them or invest in them for a while, just versus the opportunity cost of holding Bitcoin, which I'm much more, bullish on. I think if I'm going to allocate capital, it's going to be there. But when we get to the later stages of hyper Bitcoinization, then at some point NFTs could be really interesting, I think. And those video game use cases you mentioned do seem pretty rad to me.
yeah. I mean, the whole idea of like implementing Bitcoin into video games is just mind-boggling. It is really like stepping into Ready Player One, and that book is just so crazy to me. And I think it will be in to some degree where we go. But yeah, I mean, inflation, it's a serious issue right now. And I think everybody's starting to wake up to it and realize it. I kind of got upset with the local news. They brought me on to talk about Dogecoin, which is really dumb. And I wanted to talk about inflation. So probably
old
bad
bait and
part.
switch.
Yeah, probably a bad part on my end of. Actually, I don't know. I did fine, but yeah, I
It's
think
all an
inflation.
opportunity, Alex.
Yeah, and I wore my fold hat for Will.
There you
Hopefully he was
go.
happy.
Represent.
But um, but yeah, it's a serious issue right now. And Max Kaiser was on the Tim Pool podcast this week. It was really interesting. One of the things he said is, what we're seeing with this Bitcoin price rise is the dollar is hyperinflating against Bitcoin. And I think that was a pretty good description. But yeah, I mean, Kelly, you work in real estate development. Like, what the heck is going on with lumber and all of these things?
Well, lumber is. I think it came down. I don't know how much it came down today, or if it came down today. I try to only look once a day, because crying more than once a day is probably not, a good thing to do. But it got up to the index was up to 1,700, and it came back down a little bit, and that's I think that's almost a 4x rise over the period of May. So it's probably like close to 13 months. And it has been very painful. I have paid bills for the last year, but I have some leftover lumber that I can sell back for probably more than I bought it, which will, ease the blow, but it's still not enough to make up the difference. But I think it's interesting that the inflation topic comes up, because it's not just like the end products anymore. I mean, a lot of the manufacturing indexes, or like Drudge has put out posts about it. All of those guys are complaining about prices going up anywhere, 2, 5, 8, sometimes 10 or 12%. And those are their input costs for raw materials. And I've seen articles discussing, a new bull market in commodities, which, if anybody's ever studied that before, are never, 1 or 2 or 5x increases. They're like 10 or 20, sometimes even 100x in cost. And it's just one of those things where it's starting to show up everywhere. It's just wild. There's a huge, especially, being in Arizona and in Phoenix, the quantity of homes, or essentially residential places of shelter, that are being demanded, and the supply, the gap is widening. So there's even more people moving here, and there's not enough spaces for people to live. And that's a reflection of the price, which is also, a form of inflation to a degree. I mean, you've got to be able to price in your inflation for demand generally, and then what your actual underlying costs are. And when you've got both, it's a double whammy for sure. And yeah, it's to the point now where it's everywhere. I'm being change ordered to death for materials prices, and it's not fun. But you pretty much, you kind of got to roll with it. Hopefully, lumber will come back down from the moon, and that'll help out a lot of people. You have some of those phone calls with your framers or whoever's bidding your projects, and especially your lumber guys, because it's not so much here's the price, we'll get it to you. It's, well, here's the price right now, and I don't even know if I can find it. So it's even crazier, because all they're doing is they're basically quoting you the last bid plus 5%. And then it's like, okay, well, now that we got off the phone, I have to go back and I have to see if it's even available anymore, because there's just, they're just not enough being produced. And I think, I can't remember where I saw it. Somebody had a list of the mills in the Pacific Northwest that, are not up and running, but they could be turned on, right? And it's something like only 45% of the available mill space, or mill capacity rather, is being used. And a lot of it's because of the shutdowns. A lot of it's because overcapacity from 2008 that just hasn't really been brought back online. But as Bitcoiners and famous Austrians, or famously trying to be Austrian, all of this is a process. It's not like you can go in and turn on a mill, because your mill's dependent on freight getting you materials to the mill, in the form of trees, and then dicing it all up. You got to get all the labor, then you got to get the transportation out of there, and all the things that go with that, right? It's a process. So starting those things back up, when they're making hand over fist, is not exactly a top priority. Especially on top of that, we've got Biden bucks keeping everybody at home, with either the unemployment or the stimulus checks, all the different things going on. There's a huge disincentive for people to actually go to work. I mean, they could make 10 to 15% more, maybe 20% more if they actually worked, but why would you do that?
Yeah. It's like asking, would you take 15% pay cut to be able to play at home all day? And most people probably, yeah.
I got a huge backlog
like
of video games that I can use,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, go play with some NFT spaceships on Samson Mao's video game.
Hey, if I were in a video game, yeah, I'd play Infinite Fleet. It looks pretty badass. But yeah, it feels like the incentives are just broken wildly from many sides. The sort of central bank and the money supply, I think, being at the base of it, like the ultimate root that it's stemming from. But then these various regulatory bodies and agencies, kind of layers atop that, are just mangling the price signals. And that's something that I would not consider myself an nice background. I would not consider myself an economics authority or expert, but I would say, I'm an Austrian economics enthusiast, and such an important principle from that is just money as an information signal, like the price as an information signal. That is, price being used as the mechanism to communicate sort of value and cost and worth. And if you, as a supplier of some commodity, whether it's lumber or copper or gold, what have you, if there's some unexpected scenario, some labor shortage, some natural disaster, then that is the most effective way for you to communicate that, is through price. And when you introduce these middlemen and these agencies that try to centrally plan and dictate what an acceptable price is, what the price should be, it just does not work at scale. And unfortunately, the system that we've existed in for essentially all of our lives is designed around central planning. So we've never really had laissez-faire free market capitalism where prices can convey in this pristine way kind of what the market is and what the state of things is. But I think Bitcoin finally gives us a hope of achieving a system like that, where we can truly have a free market and voluntary interactions and very efficient capitalism that results from it, and hopefully human flourishing, and unprecedented productivity, because the money is good, the supply can't be manipulated, and the price signals are much more difficult to artificially mangle.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's great. A lot of conversations I have with people about Bitcoin, especially older people, is, they have this question. They ask, "What is Bitcoin backed by?" I think a good answer for that is like, well, it's backed by the market. What the market decides based on a demand for it, which people demand it because of its principles. Because of its properties. That make it predictable. And like you said, like we've never had laissez-faire markets or really like pure capitalism in this country, and it's really interesting to watch people like rail on capitalism and argue for more central planning when central planning in this situation is what is the problem.
Totally.
And it's so backwards to me. It's like
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a chart that I love that circulates around Twitter every once in a while that kind of stacks up various monies side by side, with the attributes that make good money, and it kind of compares them, right? So it's like Bitcoin, fiat, gold, I think is the one that usually makes the rounds in this image. And then you have the qualities that make a good money, right? So is it durable? Is it portable? Is it scarce? Is it easy to assay or verify the integrity of? And then does it have an established history, right? And Bitcoin just crushes it. Like when you line up these candidates for money, and just look at the fundamentals, Bitcoin absolutely knocks it out of the park. It wins in all of those categories except established history. And that's kind of where gold has the biggest advantage, right? Because gold has been sound money for thousands of years, the best money that's been available to people. But what I love about that is, if that's the only category that Bitcoin's not winning in is established history, then a different way to phrase that is just all that Bitcoin needs is time. Like if Bitcoin just continues to exist and, be what it is, do what it's doing, then gradually that history becomes established. And maybe it will be established very quickly because now we have the internet and Twitter to share information, which we didn't for most of history. So it can establish that trust and that reputation much more quickly.
I always find it interesting too that when critics address Bitcoin, that they don't, even some of the Austrian ones, that they don't use the time function, right? And I mean, kind of blows me away that if you're going to analyze something, that they pick it up and they just look at it like through a microscope in a frozen period of time, like today. Or who's the guy who always tweets? Not Peter Schiff, but there's another guy who always tweets, when Bitcoin goes down like 10 or 15%. Is it Steve Hanke who does it?
Yeah, I think it's Steve Hank or Hanke.
Yeah, whatever his name is. But
Yeah.
it's like they're looking at it, in a specific period of time in which essentially advantages whatever position that they're trying to put out, right? Well, it's like, well, if you look at it from 2009, 2010 forwards, how are they analyzing it then? I think Pierre Rochard is famous for using the tweet stamp function and price and putting in the different naysayers tweets over the course of the first time they open their mouth, like in 2013 or 2014. And there's zero perception of the history of what's really going on. They just keep, whenever they look at it, they're just looking at it through that small fraction of time. And then they're posting an analysis without looking at anything else. And to me, it's just like, well, first of all, like human action occurs through time. People do things through time. It's not, you can't cheat the system that way. You can't build a house instantly. You can't do anything instantly. You can't even tweet the garbage they tweet instantly, right? So the notion that you analyze and make an argument through just a specific pinpoint a time, as opposed to looking at something like Bitcoin where it's like, okay, it's been here for 12 years now. What has occurred over this arc, and where do we think this arc is going? I mean, Bitcoiners use the, I think it was was it
Murad Mammadov.
Murad, there you go. Murad. So
Yeah, that
Murad was the
chart.
one who created like the regression chart with all the different points and stops along the way, right? So it's like, okay, well, if we use these theorems, let's put Mises to the test, let's put his feet to the fire, and say, hey, if this were to be money, if this were to really happen, is this what would happen? As opposed to, it's like, no, that's dumb. I looked at it yesterday. It's down 5%. Move on. It's like, oh, come on, man. It's been around for 12 years. You've got to use at least some semblance of an analysis. So
100%. It blows my mind when I see, even like maybe if your specialty is short-term trading, like if you're a day trader, then I can kind of understand being locked into a very short-term time frame analysis like that. But I feel like if you're an economist, I believe he is part of Cato, like the Cato Institute.
Yeah.
Like it blows my mind that he can't zoom out. And like, do you live your entire life just like, do you look down at your feet when you walk all the time? Like, is that how you like gauge the like quality of like where you're at and what's going on? So that's what it feels like you're doing on these charts.
We should use that that background, the Pepe background, where it's it's like a split down the middle, and he's wearing like a friar's robe or whatever.
That's probably my favorite meme. And it's on the Cato side, it's got like Windows XP. Yeah. Kills me.
So we got Phil Gibson in the chat from the Sioux Saloon. Awesome podcast.
Good man. What up, Phil?
Yeah, so he asks, y'all Citadel going to be on some beachfront property in Arizona?
A little healthy trolling.
Will be. He'll be at the bar singing.
Yeah. We've got some bodies of water out here. Don't exactly have oceans. I do miss the Southern California ocean, but we got some bodies of water.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that far from what's it called? Down in Mexico. There's a Rocky Point. Yeah. I've yet to go. But
same. I've heard good things.
Yeah, so speaking of which one of us is going to forego some Bitcoin and buy the entire peninsula, the Baja Sur Peninsula?
Yeah, post hyper Bitcoinization, we'll have to rock, paper, scissors for which one's going to buy the Baja Peninsula.
It's probably not going to be me.
That's good OPSEC, Alex.
Yeah, excellent. Well played.
Yeah, I mean there definitely are some lakes, especially up in Phoenix, that are really nice to get in a boating accident if you need to.
Yep.
Good boat
That's
territory.
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's like another market that's crazy that I was hearing about. Like the boat market right now is just out of this world.
Really?
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like everything's just getting more expensive.
Well, I mean, this is something that people are talking about with inflation. Is like all this new money entered into circulation, then people didn't really have places to spend it, and as soon as they started lifting the lockdowns and the velocity of money went up, it was going to go bananas all around. And I mean, I don't know if that's, I mean, that might be true or not, but like people definitely are trying. They've been locked down for years, so they're willing to go spend big bucks on stuff to go do things, like go boat or whatever. But I mean, it's pretty wild, like looking at the justifications from the mainstream media of like food inflation that we're seeing right now. They're like, food's up because people have been eating at home more. Like, I don't think that's true. Like,
this is not the inflation you seek. Yeah. And it feels like there are all these less obvious, somewhat sinister ways that inflation creeps in that are hard to notice, where it's like shrinkflation, right? And Marty Bent was pointing this out fantastically recently. And an example is like paper towels. So paper towels outperformed the S&P 500 in the last year because the S&P 500 went up like 13%. But then the value of paper towels went up 14% because, and in an interesting way. So the price stayed the same, and in what they were using was like Costco paper towels. The price stayed the same, but you get 14% less square footage of the paper towel. So the quality of the product is being quietly eaten away. as they try to just mask the inflation. And I think that happens everywhere, right? Like a McDonald's hamburger today has a lot of garbage in it and preservatives that it didn't have 50 years ago. And like the food becomes more fiat and lower quality over time. I worry in what's happening with lumber, especially right now, as we were touching on earlier. I have to wonder if there are builders out there that are getting pressured to be more creative and a little bit flexible on the guidelines and the standards for like how much wood they're using in residential homes that they're building. You know, so it just creeps into all these different facets of society and unsettling to think about.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, Kelly, is there like a big difference in quality of houses built before 1971 and after 1971?
I would argue yes, but it's more about sure the underlying materials that were used. You know, a lot of those houses back then were built with masonry, which is a superior um, it's a superior material. It's going to last much longer, especially, you know, a concrete block is going to last, you know, forever, essentially, as long as you take care of it. Like the Pantheon is a great example. That's a 2,000-year-old concrete building. They use a very good concrete, but still, it's there. One thing to think about when it comes to that, though, is the way kind of the homes are built. Essentially, they build them one point in time as like a fad. So like a house that was built in the 70s may have like better materials and stuff, but the design itself wasn't necessarily built to be timeless, right? If it's a typical, I guess you could today it'd be like a cookie cutter home, right? Is what we would call it. Now it doesn't mean that you can't build something that way. I'm sure, you know, there are houses that were built in classical with classical designs and methods and materials that, you know, you could still use today. But I would definitely say that homes built in the 70s, 50 years ago are going to last more than a home that you build today. It's just one of those things where you've got substitute materials. Lumber is much cheaper, much easier to work with, and much faster to build with. It's not going to last forever. And for the most part, you know, you've got to use all the drywall or all these other things that go, you know, around it, insulation, blah, blah, blah. So there's more pieces to the puzzle, you know, as far as when you build something. So if you buy a house that was built then, you're going to have great bones if you want to, you know, change it. Whereas, you know, if you're working with like a, you know, we call it a stick home, you have to get a little bit further in to see, you know, where your load bearing walls are and where your trusses are, or if there's beams, all these other different things. I'm sure you've seen or been in homes that are remodeled where they open up the entire middle of the house and then there's a couple posts just randomly, right? Those are holding up a beam. In a house, you know, from the 70s, you're much less likely to have that because essentially the entire outer wall, you know, is holding everything up as opposed to, you know, one or two beams in, you know, the middle of a house. So, you know, it's one of those things where you adapt your home designs based on the materials that you're using. And if you're using more readily available value engineered materials, that's going to affect, you know, the longevity of your house. I think I've written a couple times that like I wouldn't peg the average home built today to last more than, you know, 25 to 30 years without like total remodels, you know, on the inside, whether that's the cabinets, all these other things, you know. So for example, the homes built in the 70s, like a ranch style home is basically, you know, people are going in and gutting them and they're removing walls so that they have like an open floor plan or like a great room floor plan or whatever they want to call it. So, you know, you can do that when you're using wood. Obviously, if you have a masonry wall in the middle of your house, it's a little bit harder to move. But yeah, it's just, you know, that's going to last much longer. And that was just built as the norm. It's just substitution effect over time. You know, cheaper materials that are they're gonna eat your lunch. It's just a game theory thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah, if I were ever to build a citadel, I'd like to somehow get my hands on one of the old abandoned Titan missile silos. I don't know if you guys have checked those out.
Yeah, you can buy
It's
those. They're
amazing
crazy.
you say that, actually, because a buddy of mine sent me a DM recently with a Zillow link, and on Zillow, they're selling this underground bunker not far from, I think it's like 2 hours south of Phoenix somewhere. I kind of want to go drive and check it out. It's like 400 and something $1,000 for this legit, very like heavy metal underground missile silo type of thing.
Yeah, I mean they're so crazy. Like it's just, I mean, yeah.
We
If
have
you
to
if you
burrow
have,
down and like complete the Matrix prophecy, right?
Yeah,
The Matrix was a
little do we know
documentary.
that Alex is currently broadcasting from his own missile silo.
yeah, yeah,
You bought it,
So,
didn't you? That's why it's
somewhere
not
on
on
the
Zillow
southern
anymore.
border.
yeah. I mean, I wish. Maybe that's what I'll just start saying. I'm broadcasting from the
From the
Tucson
bunker.
Bitcoin missile silo. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget
Bitcoin bunker.
you gotta
There
put
you
your
go.
tinfoil hat on too.
Oh, Bitcoin bunker. Yeah, it's. I mean, if there was ever a year to wear a tin foil hat, it would be now. You know, people have like made fun of the preppers and people that have really been uneasy about where society is going for a while, and feel like conspiracy theories are mainstream now. Or again, it's the
Yeah, I'm so much more comfortable just being intellectually honest about that than I used to. Like, I used to kind of work in like corporate America, Silicon Valley. And so there was some career risk that I felt from being too honest about what I believed when it comes to like politics or these things that are labeled conspiracy theories. And then even after I exited from the corporate world a few years ago, I still kind of just felt like this pressure to not be get that conspiracy theorist label attached to you. And I almost want to wear that with a badge of pride now. I feel like, especially in the last 18 months, the things that have transpired in the world, like the conspiracy theorists have been vindicated. I would wear a conspiracy theorist badge proudly and just, shout, like, speak your truth from the mountaintops is kind of the feeling of empowerment that I know I feel personally after seeing all of the nonsense recently, and that I hope others feel, because I think that's the best hope we have of fighting against that, right? Other than like, people storing their value in Bitcoin to kind of defund a lot of those institutions. I think just bravely speaking whatever you believe the truth is important and underappreciated in society.
Hashtag Alex Jones was right.
That's what's up. God bless that man.
I mean, he makes a lot more sense than CNN does.
Yeah, and he's got
Let's
some,
be
and he's
honest.
got some ridiculous like lizard people at the center of the world stuff, and like, I'm not on board with everything he says, but I think he's been right in important ways, and a lot of people like him have and don't get enough credit for it.
Yeah. I mean, my whole thing with conspiracy theories is like they're interesting to get into for sure, but it's really like difficult to actually prove and put a whole lot of belief into it. And there's like things that are happening right in front of us that are really like harmful to the general society. So like inflation being probably one of the biggest ones. You know, you just like gut everybody's wealth and funnel it into a few people's hands, and their financial system, like with all the bailouts and the corporate welfare and all this nonsense, is just that's what I focus on and try and get people into, because and that's like one, like you can't do anything about the space aliens, like Alex Jones talking about. Like there's nothing you can legitimately do, if that were true. But you can legitimately do something about the inflation, about the brokenness of the monetary system, about like the predatory lending, and all of these other issues that we see. And I mean, that's kind of my take on it personally, and like it helps me keep my sanity, because I think like these people that dive into every conspiracy theory, whether they're true or not, it's really demoralizing. It's just like it, and to some degree, like we have to call out stuff that like, or well, to a huge degree we have to call out stuff that is just like awful, that's going on. But at the end of the day, like we also have to focus on like what we can legitimately do, to change things and fix things as a society and a community. But yeah, that's just my take on it personally. It's like,
I agree very much. And stuff I've started to think a lot more about in recent months is kind of developing that web of trust and applying a web of trust to different areas of your life, right? And I think most fundamentally that starts with your local community, like the people that you know, the bonds and the relationships that you have with them, and meeting and building those bonds with people who share a certain set of core values and core beliefs. And, self-sovereignty would be a big one for me. Is I think just going to become more and more important, especially if society at a large scale continues to get weirder. Then knowing like-minded people and physically being around them, something that eventually, if you take it to its far enough conclusion, could become, a citadel. Maybe it manifests that way, but just that emphasis on community, and then online kind of doing the same thing digitally, right? Like establishing secure encrypted communications on Signal or Keybase with people that you trust, using
Keybase
decentralized.
Sucks. Come on.
Yeah, Keybase. Yeah, I know they got acquired by Zoom, and I'm ramping them down. So Signal's probably, I'll say, like the least bad in my mind right now. They're kind of shitcoiny, but that is what it is. But yeah, like, using Bitcoin, using secure communications, just like both digitally and physically to the extent that you can, building those webs of trust and that community is really important.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I'm really excited. Start9 is going to be launching Matrix here pretty soon. I'm going to try and get everybody using Matrix because I think that's like the ultimate. If you can self-host it instead of using a service like Signal, they have a good track record over at Signal, but I think self-hosting is so powerful. I totally with you on that.
Opening lightning channels to people you trust. Yeah.
It's really convenient knowing, real estate developer, as we're talking about Citadels for the future.
Right?
Is that right? I've decided that the desert citadel will be made of copper, with turquoise as an accent, and yes, there is no input. This is not an open system. I have decided.
Hey, as counterintuitive as it sounds, I think monarchy is underappreciated. So, and I have to say, I consider you a connoisseur of Citadel imagery and aesthetics. I enjoy that on your Twitter feed.
Yeah, I try to post the stuff I see with a lot of those accounts I add to the Bitcoin urbanism list. So if you guys don't follow that list, follow that list, because there's a lot of good people on there, and I always add more people. But yeah, whenever I see like a cool house or a location or whatever, I just throw it up, and then I have a thing for lampposts, which we don't have to talk about. But
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot of really cool places out there. I think my favorite was the one that I said I would buy and donate to the Mises Institute, because it was in Vienna, so that they could have a physical location to teach, Austrian economics. But for the most part, I think it'll be interesting to see, because especially from like my perspective, like a citadel is like a city state, right? A lot of people use the citadel as like the self-sovereign, place of the individual self. And to me, it's like, well, I mean, sure, but you could also have, if we all retreated to Austin or to Miami, as some would have it, that in itself is a citadel. It's just like-minded people in the same, physical geographic space. So think about what all the good we could accomplish, in the same space, with the same mindset, trying to achieve the same goal, which is a fantastic human experience, I would imagine. It's been done before in many different ventures, but yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to it. I need to post more articles though. I've been thinking about submitting some stuff locally. I don't know, Alex, did they reach out to you because of the podcast, or how did you end up on the local program talking about the dog coin?
Oh, I reached out to them probably 6 months ago, and then they just remembered me. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's
a
lot easier. Yeah.
That is such a good point you make, Kelly, about like, it's not this binary thing where it's like you're either kind of living as you are today, and then like, boom, someday you're in this physical like fortress structure, and that's a citadel. There's sort of this whole spectrum to that citadel manifestation, right? And it can, yeah, just start with like the cities as they are today, or the neighborhoods as they are today, and more like-minded people kind of congregating there. And even before that, there's this digital step, right, where you can kind of opt out in place. And maybe what we're doing now is almost a micro example of that. Like this conversation and Bitcoin Twitter is like, even if you can't or won't yet physically move, you can almost build these digital citadels where, and thanks to Bitcoin, you can store your value in them, so to speak. So yeah, I think it helps just like enable that. It's this achievable, more like near-term, low-friction milestone on that spectrum along the way to what could be a future fancier citadel.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
definitely agree that the digital citadel is, akin to Bitcoin Twitter, or even these conversations. It's all within the same gradient, the same realm. Just walking around to different places, listening to different conversations, just as anybody can join and listen to us or post questions and all that. So it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Totally. And meetups too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Definite
Any
meetups.
anyone within driving distance of Phoenix, Arizona, or Tucson, Arizona, we got some good meetups going. So come out.
Yeah, they're great. The Bitcoin meetups have helped me keep my sanity, over the past year. Like there's a while I was a part of a couple that were online, my week was kind of like a roller coaster where like Mondays were the day that the meetup happened and I, felt amazing, and then slowly down to Sunday, and then Monday it's just like felt great again.
Like drained over the period of days where you have to be making small talk about what's on Netflix this week, and then you get to like be with Bitcoiners, and you get this burst of good energy from talking about real stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that aspect of like being around like-minded individuals is so important, to have people, because I think that's like how a lot of people are feeling in general, is just like isolated and being bombarded with all these different ideologies that don't necessarily meet their values, and it's incredibly isolating. So like I just had a conversation, with the single mom today, and that's she's been stuck at home homeschooling her kids, and that's kind of what she was going through, to a certain degree. And I just think like, I mean, there's so many Telegram groups and all sorts of cool different networks of people. I mean, that's the thing that's been amazing about the internet, is like how it's polarized society, where you get, there used to be like kind of like a dominant narrative that was kind of dictated, and people would kind of circulate around these, different ideas. Like everybody would like watch the Oscars, and now nobody watches the Oscars, and there's like a million different, options of consumption. You can go and interact with your, community that you relate to. I think that's super interesting. What you were saying with like digital online citadels almost. I mean, even these companies like Fold, all the employees live all over the country. Or Swan, you've got some people living abroad, and that's such a crazy concept. Like there's not a localized office that everybody goes to, and that's shifting. Um, but yeah.
And at some point, you could even, I'm interested to see if more pseudonymous companies will begin.
Hmm.
Like if you do have a digital product and your service is online, then, maybe like, do you still need a legal entity? Do you still want to incur the overhead of that? Do you still need to reveal your personal actual identities? Or if you have some way to establish credibility and trust with investors, with potential customers, maybe you can be this kind of like you don't need a bank account even. Maybe you could kind of be this unstoppable company.
Well, you're already seeing that with like, it's not really legal, but with like people that provide torrents and live streaming services. So yeah, I think for sure that'll be a thing.
Totally.
Like, yeah,
It'll
it's
be interesting to see.
yeah, it's I don't know. The world's moving so quick. It's just hard to predict. So yeah, let's get into some predictions for the next year. So or well, we'll start next 3 years. How many trillions of dollars is Biden going to print?
What'll the chart of M2 money look like?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Well, they changed them too. So
Yeah, they changed M1, right? M1's the one that looks absolutely like mind-boggling. It's just like a wall, like a 90-degree angle in the supply. And part of that I think is a function of them like changing the way they classify some assets. But yeah, then M2, I mean, M2 is not quite as jarring, but it still is like crazy. And what, like 40% or something? Or no, I think like 27% increase in the last 12 months. It's crazy.
And I think too, it's like what's different this time is essentially the normalization of transfer payments and the normalization of the Fed will monetize it, you know? So I don't know. I think if he's printed what, 3 trillion so far this year, right?
with another 2 on deck, I think.
With another 2 on deck. So
It's at
like
least 3, yeah.
well, I mean, think about it this way. How about if it gets so out of hand that it, from here it doubles annually every year? You know what I mean? So that, you've got your when money dies situation. If you guys haven't read that book, you gotta read it. But where it's like the last time, there you go. The last round of money that they printed, they were just adding multiple zeros to the dollar bills just because they thought that was, yeah, they were essentially every time they did it, they doubled down on what they did before. So if they print it, if we're printing $5 trillion now, well, the only way to fix $5 trillion is to print $10 trillion and give it to everyone so that they can afford, whatever it is they're buying at these new price increases. Well, it's like, well, now there's a situation where that 10 trillion is spent. So how do you fix that? Well, do you give everybody $25 trillion? Like at that point, it's like, okay, if you haven't figured out what's going on by now, there's it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I would wager that we would see a doubling each year going forward.
Dang.
Terrifying to think about, but yeah, I feel like that's not out of the realm of possibility at all. And you're right, like the more they do it, the more people get used to it, the more kind of this the more whatever, I guess, amenable to risk people will become, because they remove the moral hazard from the equation, right? This expectation develops that, oh, if this risky investment of mine doesn't go well, I'll just get bailed out. I'll get this free, easy money. And therefore, the whole system becomes increasingly fragile over time. And so it gets harder to undo. Every time that you do it, people expect you to keep doing it. There's this fantastic talk that Parker Lewis did at BitBlock Boom last year. Yeah. And he had this great line in it about, there's that children's book, like if you give a mouse a cookie, and his line was like, if you give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask you to buy his CCC bonds. Like talking about how that's that they will just continue to want to be bailed out and have their junk assets kind of purchased by the buyer of last resort, the Federal Reserve and the central banks, because that's what they've become used to and comfortable with. And so, yeah, I worry about the printing, about hyperinflation, about all the stuff that I think might happen. I hope doesn't happen, because it could lead to a dark dystopian place in some ways. But if we build Bitcoin infrastructure and onboard people quickly enough, then maybe it can be somewhat of a smooth upgrade for society.
Yeah, for sure. Russ asks, he's in the chat, what do you guys think happens to tax compliance when we continue printing at these levels?
Ooh, I worry that there are going to be very specific taxes levied against Bitcoin. Perhaps cryptocurrency, but I could even see them being just specifically Bitcoin, where the justification is, oh, well, this thing it's almost in the interest of national security, and some with maybe sprinkle a few dashes of like, these early Bitcoiners don't deserve this. They clearly got lucky. They've had 1,000x returns. So
you, Alex.
Yeah. And so therefore, we're going to tax them at an 80% capital gains rate or something along those lines, just, mind melting levels. Um, Again, I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope we orange pill enough of the Senate and Congress that they have skin in the game and wouldn't like that either. But I think when they get desperate, they will resort to desperate measures. And a lot of what the government does is enabled by the fact that they can print more money, or that they have engineered this system that pushes people to buy their bonds. And so Bitcoin absolutely crushes their ability to print money, and it mostly crushes the incentive for anybody to buy bonds. So you have just starved the state of their primary source of funding for doing what they do, kind of their lifeblood in a way. And the only thing they're left with is like capital gains tax and income tax. And so if you take away everything from over there, I just feel like the only mechanisms they have left are those things. And so getting more extreme with them would make sense in some ways.
Well, I think it's interesting too. So to bring up when money dies again, he has a whole portion of the latter stages of the hyperinflationary event where they basically say like they stopped collecting taxes because it was essentially more. They figured out that it was more expensive to try and collect taxes from people who essentially took their wealth out of the country and exchange it for either for gold or dollars or the Swiss francs, like whatever they could get it out of the Deutschmark, like they got it out of the Deutschmark. And then they're trying to go after these people who have essentially fled the country with their wealth, and they're just left with, the normal people. So like, well, they're not going to be able to tax them because there's just too many of them. And then the cost of enforcement is now just through the roof because essentially all the different union demands that were coming down the pipe, especially for the government workers, like the government just simply couldn't afford it. And everything was just moving essentially too fast. It was moving faster than anybody could negotiate to keep up with. So, at that point, it's just, you toss your hands up in the air. I mean, it'll be way different with, digital, I would say the digital abilities that the government has now with access to your bank account and all that stuff. But, on the same token, if you're on the receiving end of these transfer payments, like what are they going to do? Transfer, $1,000 and take, $500 out? I mean, riots in the streets almost automatically. But I think the enforcement of tax collection will be similar in circumstance to that, where, if you can catch a couple guys running out the door, they'll do it. But for that part, a lot of people are running for the door if they're not already out already.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're already seeing that. Like Biden's talking about giving more funding to the IRS. Russ commented again. He said unrealized capital gains, and I'm totally with him. Yellen already dropped a hint that that's on the table, which is really scary.
Yeah, I feel like that's ominous because even though it just seemed to be dropping a hint, like the idea didn't get completely laughed out of the room. It wasn't viewed as totally insane by a lot of the mainstream. I think there were some people nodding their heads going, oh yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Whereas decades ago, it would have been completely insane. And so just gradually we're progressing to this place where that's becoming normalized or more acceptable. And for me, that's the territory of like complete insanity. Being taxed on like before you've sold an asset that you have is crazy to me. That's like up and vote with your feet move kind of time.
Well, and the other thing with that is like where, think about the absolute demand for cash. If you have to do something like that, most even corporations don't carry more than a fraction of, the cash as opposed to their total assets on their books. Like, what are you going to do? Level a 10 basis point tax? Well, if you're $1 billion company, now you've got some extra cash that you got to come up with above and beyond what you need for your OPEX or just your rainy day fund. So, oof.
Big oof.
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's not. I don't see it as like too different from property taxes because they're essentially taxing you on an asset that you haven't sold, but it's just on literally everything. Like, I mean, I've got bullets, and those are going up in value. Like through the roof. Like Janet Yellen, are you gonna be taxing me on my 45 cal? That's was a year, 2 years ago was like I don't know, like 10 cents a bullet, and today is like that, even that's expensive, maybe like 5 6, yeah, maybe like about 10 cents a bullet, and then today is like trading at it like $1 a bullet. Like
Bullets are precious metals.
yeah, yeah. Russ says, remember, World Economic Forum says in 2030 you will own nothing and be happy.
I will not
Yes.
live in the pod. I will not eat the bugs.
Nothing but my 12 seed words. Thank you very much.
The World Economic Forum doesn't understand my ambitions to own that Titan missile silo. So
that is not priced in.
Yeah. Where can people follow your guys' work?
For me, pretty much Twitter. I'm S-then-C on Twitter, STHENC. Tweet mostly about Bitcoin, a little bit about weird nutrition and society.
And then I'm on Twitter as well at KTLANNAN. And then I write at bitcoinurbanism.substack.com. Also have a Twitter handle, Bitcoin Urbanism. So stop by, check us all out. Alex, where can we find you?
Oh, I'm easy. I'm on YouTube, and I've actually been getting on some alternative platforms recently for video, and I'm playing around with Library right now, which is kind of a hassle. And they shitcoin. I get paid in shitcoins, I guess, but I
sounds
just
not ideal.
that. Well, you know, convert it to Bitcoin. But Rumble, I just created a channel, started uploading there. Twitter, Tucson Bitcoin. But the best way to meet all of us is come to the Bitcoin meetups. Yeah.
Well said. Meetup.com, the AZ Bitcoin Network, Tucson Bitcoin. Got monthly events for both. So would love to have anybody in the area.
I'm probably going to take Russ's suggestion and change mine to the Tucson Bitcoin Citadel. So
do it. I dig that.
Yeah. I'll leave it up to you what you want to do with the AZ Bitcoin Network, Steven. But
we can brainstorm on that in the group chat.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Fun stuff.
That was a great conversation. Kelly's prediction, is really scary, and I think I agree with it. Unfortunately, that we're going to see an increase in printing. That's just insane. This is why it's so important for people to be taking the custody of their own keys and to be getting exposure to Bitcoin, to be getting exposure to money that isn't going to be devalued in the same way that the dollar is, and one that you can actually control without having to rely on the banks and, the whole infrastructure that's built to just extract wealth from you. It's really, really exciting that we have a tool like this in a time like this, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Make sure to go follow Steven and Kelly on Twitter, and thanks for watching.